Intro to Accessibility, CIBC Digital Accessibility Team. Internal. The following presentation took place in front of an audience. The presenter stood at the front of the room and referred to the slides that were displayed on the TV.
All right, so again today will be the first topic of the first level training, which is Intro to Accessibility. So it's a lot of just general information just to get you thinking about people with disabilities, to try to think about, things from also the points of views from different disciplines, not just QA. Once we start level 2 training, which won't be for a few months, then we'll have training catered to each discipline. And again, if this is some information that you already know, it's probably also good to review. If it's new, then you might find it very helpful. So I'll go ahead and get started.
Slide reads, what are different types of disabilities?
So today, we're going to talk about different types of disabilities, as well as some assistive technologies that different folks with disabilities use. Right before I start, what are the different types of disabilities that that you guys know? Hearing? Visual? Yes. Some? Anything that? Mobility? Great. So we'll talk about pretty much all of those, and we'll break it down, starting with
slide reads site, permanent, temporary, and situational.
The way we'd like to think about disabilities in terms of how users use digital technologies is there are users that might have permanent disabilities. So for visual, it could be someone who's blind. For example, in this picture, it's a blind man reading a Braille book. Sometimes it's just a temporary situation where for a period of time, the person might not be able to use things to their full capacity. So for example, having cataract. So cataract is clouding over the eye where you might not have full visual capacity, you might not see direct, you might just have peripheral vision, but also might be temporary if caught early and removed, as well as situational. So situational is probably one of the biggest ones that, in terms of it affecting everybody. For example, you could be outside trying to use your phone, even in a bright room, trying to use your computer and not be able to use your, look at the screen. Could be because of contrast, and that in that moment might make you, experience that type of impairment. So, I'd like to showcase how someone with a visual disability or someone who is blind might experience difficulties.
Slide reads site challenge example without proper alt text. A box with an X through it, with the text GHH124IMG-from-1211.png beside it.
So in this example, we have what's supposed to be an image, but really it's a box with an X through it, which doesn't tell you much. It doesn't tell you what the image is. And this image doesn't have proper alt text. Now, is everyone familiar with what alt text is, alternative text? And if you're not, alternative text is basically the piece of the code that you can attach to an image that basically describes the image. In this situation, the image just has a long file name. Now, who here uses a screen reader or have used a screen reader before? Perfect. If I have an image with a file name such as this, which is, /GHH12_4, does anyone care to guess what would my screen reader say? Yeah, possibly, yes, very possibly. So basically, we'll repeat the file name. Some screen readers are getting smarter, where they would not say anything. However, in a lot of situations, they will read out the file name. And to a blind person or a screen reader user, that's not very useful. Something like this would be much better. Again, having an image with an alt text. So here we have a girl riding her bike during the CIBC Run for the Cure event. Even as someone who's visually impaired, someone who's using a screen reader, someone who might be blind, you might be able to form some sort of idea what this image is.
Slide reads hearing, permanent, temporary, situational.
Okay. Someone said hearing, so again, hearing is another one that we deal with. Where does hearing in terms of digital, where does that fall in terms of the things that we think about? Videos, exactly. So that's probably the biggest thing in terms of digital, videos. But another one, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a bit, voice. Voice is a big one. So hearing impaired people, they might not have full capacity of voice or even being able to talk. So when you introduce voice technology, things like Siri, voice recognition, that might be also very impairing to them. They might not be able to use it the same way someone who can speak. But videos is a big one. So again, hearing we have permanent. So for example, someone who's deaf. So we have a girl here who's holding her phone. She obviously has a hearing aid. Sorry. It could be temporary, such as an ear infection. If you ever experienced it, it's quite bothersome. Sometimes it could be one ear, sometimes it could be both ears, and you might have very reduced to no hearing during that time. As well as situational. So again, in this image we have, what probably a lot of us do in the morning commute, just a bunch of people in the subway train using their phones. And if you ride the train or ride any mode of transportation, you can relate to it at how noisy the surrounding is. So if you're trying to watch a video, trying to even listen to music, you might need to increase the volume. Sometimes you can't do that, so you might need to depend on things like captions.
Slide shows a man in a business suit sitting in front of a white backdrop.
All right, so an example regarding hearing impairment where it could be challenging, something without captions. So this is a screenshot of Jamie Gollenbach. So he's one of our senior financial advisors. Does anyone know what Jamie is talking about in this screenshot?
Taxes?
He's talking about taxes. You know what's funny? Last session, someone said the exact same thing. Talking about taxes. It's a good guess. All right. So he's not talking about taxes, but it's a good guess. He is talking about, or he's saying rather, to start, there was a new credit called the Canada Training Credit. And that's basically, you might think is very essential information to know. So you can imagine if this video had no captions, right? There's no way for anyone who's hearing impaired to know this. So just to simulate how someone who's deaf might experience it.
Slide reads, physical, permanent,
Again,
temporary,
someone said mobility.
situational.
So physical disabilities. Anyone know of a specific type of physical disability?
Neuromotor damage to the brain?
Neuromotor damage to the brain, yes. Anything else? Other guesses? Doesn't have to be permanent. Quadriplegia. Wow, good segue. Yes. So quadriplegia, that's a type of permanent disability most of the time. So basically quadriplegia simply means that you're not able to use your forelimbs in a way that's, functional. So it could be your arms, hands, legs, feet. Also temporary. So we have someone with a broken arm. You might have a hard time using a phone, using a mouse, as well as situational. So I guess most of us do this, trying to navigate one hand using our phone while holding something to drink in the other hand or holding something else in our other hand. So again, that leaves you temporarily disabled, in the situation you're disabled and might need assistance from whatever you're using. Just curious, for a situation like this where let's say you're holding a drink in one hand and the phone in the other hand, what are some things that would make your experience better as a user?
There's a button that you can glue here, I guess, and just hold it nicely.
Sorry, what?
I think you attach here. That's what I've seen people do.
What's the thing that you attach?
I don't know, it's just a holder. Yeah.
Oh, it's a holder. Okay, so that's good. Nice. All right, so it's basically some sort of addition to the phone that helps you hold it better.
Yes.
Okay, cool. But in terms of digitally speaking, because we cannot add that to apps. Yes.
You can minimize your screen. So there's a feature on the newer phones now where you can take the screen size and minimize it to the left or the right hand side.
Okay, so you said to minimize your screen either to the left or to the right, and that will help you maybe navigate more apps?
Use your
One finger.
Instead of having
Instead of having
to hold.
two phones. Yeah. Yes.
Voice control.
Voice control. Okay, so an additional feature of voice control. Perfect.
A navigation page on the navigation pane on the side.
So a navigation pane on the side, almost like a hamburger menu that pops up that helps you navigate. Perfect. Yeah. Someone said it. I don't know who did, but someone also said large buttons. So large buttons, definitely something very simple. You can add in a design where, instead of trying to hit a target that's this small, it's like a little bit bigger and kind of helps you. But all these are great ideas, even the one with the little, addition to the phone.
Slide reads, physical challenge example,
So,
with a photo of a
I don't
pop-up
have
with
really
caged buttons.
a great example for this one, but just think of something that's not keyboard accessible to someone who has a physical disability. Let's say someone who cannot use a mouse. If developers don't make things like a pop-up icon or any button, for example, here we have a pop-up window that says, "Are you sure?" a close, cancel, and an OK button. And the close, cancel, and OK buttons have basically a cage around them. They can't press it. So if I can't tap to it, I can't press enter, I can't press space bar, you're pretty much caging me. I cannot use it. Now, if we make something keyboard accessible, pretty much opens it to a lot of folks. And keyboard accessibility is very important, and you'll see a little bit later why, once we start talking about the assistive technologies.
Slide reads, cognitive, permanent, temporary,
I got one
situational.
more, cognitive. So cognitive, I will just mention that it's one of the more recent additions to digital accessibility. So it's still being studied a lot in terms of what to enforce and what not to enforce, but there are a few things that we understand about them. However, just mention about permanent, temporary, and situational. An example of a permanent disability would be something like dyslexia. So here we have, this is what a dyslexic person often has to deal with just to read a book. This is basically text with some letters that might be reversed mirror image. And that's basically how someone with dyslexia might experience reading. Again, something temporary could be like a head injury. Again, if someone has a head injury, it could be different things they might experience. Could be just pain sitting on the computer for too long. Might be oversensitivity to bright lights, bright colors, so on and so forth. Or again, situational. Again, just being distracted day-to-day life. You're trying to pay your bill. You're trying to, talk to someone on the phone. You're watching TV. All the stuff could be mentally distracting. So the more complex information is on your device, on phone, could be content, could be images. The less receptive you are, the more frustrated someone would be. And this, probably a lot of us could also relate to that. Like, not all websites out there are designed in a good way. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions so far about different types of disabilities? Or is it pretty much all clear?
Random colors.
Color blindness? So color blindness, yeah, that would be definitely under the sight. Sight more or less. And that could be affected by using certain types of colors that they can't discern, identifying things by colors, but that's a good addition.
Slide reads, cognitive challenge example, with a dense block of text below.
So I have here a cognitive challenge example. So I'm just going to pull up a paragraph for you guys to read. And this is an example of complex information. For the people in the back, if you can't read it, don't worry. I'll just read the first few words. So it says something like, Keisha Eth receive Yuri completed application form She Che Hatif Jin 15th. Who here thinks this is English, by the way? Nobody. That's great, because it's not English. So if you can't read this, don't worry about it. Probably most people won't be able to. This is fictitious language. This is Dothraki. So if you watch the show Game of Thrones, you might be familiar with what Dothraki is, but not how to speak it. But this is just to show you how complex information might sound like to someone who cannot perceive it. And the real paragraph reads something like this. We must receive your completed application form on or before the 15th day of the second month. Following the month, you are reporting. If you do not submit your application electronically or the 25th day of the second month, blah, 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 blah. So you might as well be speaking Dothraki, Klingon, or any other made-up language, because this is not straightforward.
Slide shows a table detailing when forms must be received
This
by
would have
submitting
been much
electronically
better.
or by mail in
A
person.
simplified version of what this paragraph was trying to say is, if you submit your form electronically, we must receive it by the 25th of the second month. Still not the best, but much better. If you submit your form by mail or in person, we must receive it by the 15th of the second month. So just a simple example of how complex paragraph, just by redesign, rethinking the verbiage, could be made much better. And of course, we have other types of disabilities. So we have things like low vision, hard of hearing, epilepsy, tremors, and fine motor control, Alzheimer's, color blindness, ADHD, ADD, and ALS. Also, we have a lot of limitations that people don't usually think about when they're thinking about permanent disabilities, but once you start thinking in terms of situational, there could be limitations. So ESL depression, using small devices, old technologies, limited bandwidth, mittens or holding anything in your hand, smudge screens, small hands, big hands. ESL I would give a big shout out to because at CIBC we do reach out to folks who might be new immigrants, might be students, and the English might not be their first language. So it's a big one to think about, maybe not in terms of the QA specifically, but for writers, for content writers, as well as for designers, it might be something that they might want to think about. Oops, sorry. All right, so we have a quote here that says, "We're all temporarily abled," and it's said by Derek Featherstone, who I believe is one of the senior people at Level Access, one of the accessibility organizations out there. Does anyone know or care to guess what this means? We're all temporarily abled, yes.
This means that once in a while we'll be disabled.
Once in a while, we'll be disabled. Yes? So, pretty much straightforward. Oops, sorry. This means that everyone is disabled at some point, in one way or another, as we've seen in the previous slides. So, we all benefit somehow from digital accessibility. In a way, I'd like to think of it as it's the ultimate UX, ultimate user experience. Because if you're designing for accessibility, it's almost foolproof that things will work for everyone else. All right, so before I move up to assistive technologies, does anyone have any question? Perfect. All right. So, because we are in digital, we probably, again, a lot of you use screen readers, as you mentioned earlier. So screen readers is a huge deal. It could be in the form of a screen reader on a desktop. So in this image, we have a lady that's working in a call center. She is visually impaired, and she's using a screen reader. So how it works is the screen reader will, feed the audio information by reading the code of the website or whatever application she's using, and she's able to relate that to the customer. Does anyone notice anything special about her setting?
The dog.
What? Sorry? The dog, the service dog in the back. Yes. Anything else? Anything special? Sorry?
She's not using her mouse.
She's not using her mouse. I'm sorry, I just can't hear people in the back. So she's not using her mouse. Great point. So a lot of times folks who are screen reader users might not use their mouse. I'm not going to say 100% of the time. Some people might have some visual ability, so they might depend on mouse, keyboard, screen reader, a combination of all. But you can guess like someone who's totally blind might not even have a use for a mouse. And again, we have here a gentleman who's using a screen reader on his phone, navigating. He's either getting off the bus or waiting for a bus. So phone screen readers have come so far. Some would argue that phone screen readers are even better than desktop screen readers because a lot of them are built into the phone when you get them. And they can give you pretty much all sorts of information. For all we know, that he might be getting the same information that's displayed in the bus stop's neon screen that says, the bus number, route, as well as the wait times. So again, when designing or when we're testing, technically, we should be looking at desktop as well as mobile. So magnifiers, it's another big one. This doesn't get a lot of recognition, although that, I think according to, I don't want to quote a specific text, but according to CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institution for the Blind, the number of folks who are actually totally blind are way less than folks who are, have different types of visual disability or have some vision and might depend on things like magnifiers or other assistive technologies to help them see. In this example, we have a man in the classroom. He's learning code, so he's using the screen reader to enlarge part of the screen. So you can imagine with enlarging part of the screen, there's going to be a lot of scrolling, maybe horizontal scrolling, than an overall user would experience. And this is how it will look like on a mobile device. So this is from an Android device, and it's basically zooming into sort of like the left side of the screen. And it's very important because one of the things that we like to stress is whenever designing, try to have the most important information be on the left, top left, just how we read. Because again, when you're magnifying, you can imagine that if you just have all the important information on the right, the amount of time it might take someone to scroll. Some people might need to zoom in like up to 400%. So by having information on the left, it really helps out folks who use or depend on magnifiers. Okay. So we have something that's not very well known, the Braille display and keyboard. And if you haven't heard about them, that's all right. So it can look something like this. It looks almost like a skinny keyboard. And the Braille display or Braille refresh part is actually tactile. You can touch it. So the users would have some sort of a button to maybe go up and down, almost like your arrow keys using the screen reader. Go up and down, and will work the same way. Detect the code and just display the information in Braille. So that's the Braille display or refresh part of that setup. There's also the keyboard edition, which doesn't look like a normal keyboard. It's a set of maybe 6 or 8 keys. And through the different combination, the key will actually translate into a letter or a character, comma, or punctuation of some sort. And of course, there has to be some sort of literacy for people to be able to use this. Not all blind people are literate in Braille, so they might not be able to use this, but there's a lot of people that do. And this is how it would look like on an iPad. So on an iPad, again, it could be very complex in terms of the setup, but the most basic setup for Braille, it would be the Braille keyboard itself. So it's a touch keyboard, as you can see in this image. Obviously, the user would calibrate it before they start typing, based on their positioning, based on their typing, and it will read the information via audio. So you have the option of attaching an extra refresh if you want, but if you don't, it will just read the information via audio. So Braille is also available on touch devices. Does anyone have any questions about the visual disabilities assistive technologies? Perfect. All right. And then we have sticks. Sticks is a more, not to undermine them, but they're a more basic form of assistive technology. As we can see here, it could be a stick that's a mouse stick. So we have a lady who's in a wheelchair and she doesn't have arms. So obviously she depends on this mouse stick to use the keyboard. For her specific setup, she does have some trackball mouse on the side, but it's also safe to assume that a lot of people that use that type of technology won't have a mouse setup because just using it with the stick, it could be very difficult for folks. So sometimes it's their only keyboard. And the setups of sticks could, again, be dependent on your type of disability, your type of comfort. So we have a man also on a wheelchair who's using it with a tablet, but in his stick is a head stick, actually. It's attached to his head. It could just work better with how he moves. Again, this is where making things keyboard accessible is very important, as well as making things larger is important if you're using the touch device with that type of technology. And then we get to switch devices, which again, they could be very complex in terms of how they're set up. But ultimately, what switch devices are, they're big buttons. Or they're in the form of big buttons. So in this example, and you might not see it very clearly, this lady, she has cerebral palsy, and she basically doesn't have very good motor controls. The only thing that she can do comfortably is press buttons with her head. So she has 2 or 3 buttons on her headrest on her power wheelchair, and that's how she navigates her computer. Similarly, we have a little boy. He's on a wheelchair, and he's using a 2-button switch device with his tablet. So switch devices, that's where they're very versatile. They're not just for people who cannot move. They might also be for folks who might have some sort of cognitive disability. Most of us use the regular keyboard, the QWERTY keyboard, on a daily basis, so it's very easy for us to use. But for someone, that could be very confusing. It's a lot of buttons, a lot of letters. Using 2 buttons might make it much simpler. And if you're curious on how it works, think of almost like a grid system where it could you can have buttons kind of go from one icon to another, or just do some sort of scan of your screen like a grid, and then you kind of zone in on where you want to click or where you want to go, which you can imagine could be time consuming. So that's why we'd like simpler designs, simpler content, because it makes it much easier for users who use this type of technology. Any questions about button switch devices? All right. And just quickly mention sip and puff. So sip and puff is also another type of technology where you would sip and puff through a tube, and the sip and the puff will complete 2 different types of actions. Most of the time, this technology is not used on its own. A lot of times you'll see users also using something else to help them navigate a web page or an app. In this example, we have a man who's using a joystick and it's attached to his chin, or he can use it with his chin. And the sip and puff tube is the white one that's curved to the side. So he might be using the joystick to navigate and the sip and puff to kind of like press on and off buttons or to launch whatever he wants to launch. And on the other side, we have the same setup, same idea, basically a sip and puff, but it could also be used with mobile technology. So these things, they're very versatile. You can use on desktop or mobile. Okay. And lastly, we'll talk about voice recognition. So who here has used voice recognition on their phone before? Or you used voice? On your computer? So what did you use on the computer?
We built the baked-in application from Windows Vista.
Oh.
Microsoft speech recognition.
So built-in application Windows Vista, Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft voice recognition.
Voice recognition. Oh, nice. So how did you find it?
Terrible.
Terrible. Okay. Who else used voice recognition on phone or? You would use Dragon. So Dragon is a software that's used on desktop. Perfect. Anyone used some sort of voice recognition on their phone? Siri? Google Assistant? Yes. So how did you find Siri or Google Assistant? How do you guys find that? Siri's pretty good? Perfect.
Google is pretty intuitive.
Google Assistant is intuitive, kind of intuitive.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Did you have difficulties using it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Dragon user, did you have difficulties using Dragon? Yeah. Why so? Complicated to learn. Good point. Yes. So I'm just asking all these questions because voice recognition, as we know, it's been around for a while, but mainstream, let's say, it's rather new. So let's say there's just a lot of hiccups on the way. So it could range from difficult to learn. It could be not very good in terms of like recognizing your voice just because of, it could be your mic. It could be that you have a dialect and it wasn't programmed to detect that dialect or understand it very well, right? As well as the algorithms, just understanding what you're saying. So it's a new technology. However, that being said, still a lot of people use it for assistive technologies. Again, just like the sip and puff, they might use it with something else. So we have an example here of a man, again, on a wheelchair, and he's sitting in front of the computer. You can obviously see that he's using his finger to point on something on the screen. But one, he might not have enough dexterity in his fingers to use it comfortably. Or two, he might get fatigued. He might get tired from using his hand to kind of like use a keyboard or mouse. So he might alternate to voice and keyboard and or mouse. As well as the person with a bit more complex setup here. He's got 2 phones going on. He's got the camera, he's got the tube, he's got the joysticks, but he also is using voice recognition, so he has the headset on, and that helps him kind of like navigate. And that kind of flexibility, you can almost think about yourself trying to like look on something on your phone, like you want to buy something from a store, but finish the purchase on your desktop. That kind of, multi-channel kind of experience is almost like the same idea with using this type of different setup or more complex setup. So this kind of brings us to the end of assistive technologies. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about assistive technologies? Yes?
How do we read a web screen in a web page, a Chrome page? Is there an app or something that we can make it read to us back?
Okay, so the question is, how can we read a page on Chrome, a web page? So
the way that we have on the device, we just voice over, we can read, it reads back to us. Mm-hmm. On a Chrome, how can we do that? Is there an extension? Is there a software that?
Oh, are you talking about what's it called? Like a Chromebook? Or
page on desktop.
Oh, like just a Chrome browser on a desktop. Okay. Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. So that goes back to the screen readers. So there are screen readers that you can get. Obviously, there's different types of screen readers out there. The one that I would recommend getting is NVDA. So it's a free NVDA. It's a free software that you can download. Obviously, if you're downloading it from the CIBC network, you just submit a request, and you get that exemption to download it. It's very intuitive. We do have guides on our website on how to use it. So if you want to go to our Confluence page, there's guides there on how to use it too. So yeah, there are desktop screen readers for that. Perfect. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know that there's an assistive technology where you can only use your eyes.
Oh, assistive technologies where you use eye tracking? Yes.
Eye tracking. Is that something that we would be able to cater to?
So that's a good question. Eye tracking. Eye tracking, it pretty much, it's almost like it's tied into, do you see the stick assistive technology? So not to get into the complex setup of eye tracking, but it pretty much works very similar to that. So as long as your applications are keyboard accessible, large enough to click, the technology works in the same way where it sort of like, think of a laser on a screen. Once you focus in, stare at it for a little bit, it activates that. The rest of what happens with the eye tracking software, we'll let the assistive technology specialists worry about that in terms of how to set it up for their clients. But as long as on our end we're doing things big, easy to navigate, keyboard accessible, eye tracking should work, as far as I know. Any other questions?
Question at all.
Yes, alt text.
Yeah. So I noticed we don't put alt text on every image.
Yes.
Should we?
Okay, so I'm gonna.
Your point of view?
So the question is, you notice that we don't put alt text on every image.
Yeah.
Should we? I'll ask you a question. By we don't put alt text, do you mean like there's no alt text at all, or it's alt text
They say
equals
it's
empty
like a
quotes?
decorated image.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like.
So I'll answer your question right away.
It's there.
Yeah,
so to me, I feel like there should be alt text.
Yeah. So 99.9% of the situations, there should be some form of alt text. I'm just saying 99.9 because there's, not to get into too complex code, but there's like a CSS way to handle an image where it's like a background, so you can't put alt text on it. Very like 0.01% situation that I wouldn't worry too much about. But 99.9% of situations, you need some sort of alt text, whether it's alt text equals a description of the photo or alt text equals empty quotes, which means it's screen reader, please ignore this image. Yeah.
Okay.
So there has to be some sort of alt text in the code. So that's where it gets confusing. Some folks might say, oh, we don't need alt text here because it's decorative. Sort of true. You need alt text that tells screen readers to ignore it because it's decorative. So that's where the misunderstanding
So they
happens.
should put that in the copy deck then?
That should be, as far as I'm concerned, it should be in the copy deck, yes. Yeah.
Or there should be a title. A title field, the screen reader will read the title field.
Title field for images. So your comment was add something in the title field, and I don't want to turn this into a dev session. So the thing is with title, so it's an HTML, I think, it's not an attribute, but it's in the HTML where you can add the title to the image. Not all screen readers will detect title, unfortunately. That's why alt text is safer. Yeah.
But for a tester, if they don't provide alt text, you can still check that it has the empty quotes. And
Yes.
then you know that,
Oh,
at least
yeah.
the developers
I
have.
know that.
Yeah. Whether,
Saying,
yeah.
Should it say something?
Yeah, if you're talking from a copy deck point of view, it should, in my opinion, it should. If there are hiccups where people are not and it's an issue, we can always take that offline and see what needs to be done about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just wondered.
yeah, of course. No problem. Yes?
So I think going back to that, now when I was here,
Yeah.
obviously, they were doing something like if you have a bullet point that had an image instead of your regular little arrow thing,
Yeah.
it's considered not really an image?
So the question is if you have bullet points in some form of list, whether it will be an image or not. Again, not to turn it into a dev session, it all depends on how it's done. So because sometimes icons are tricky because they're not really images. And that's where it gets tricky because it's not an image. So technically, it might not need alt text of some sort. So if you're ever getting to that point where there's uncertainty of what you're seeing in front of you as an image or not, especially with icons, you can always just ask the accessibility specialist. So on this floor, AEM, it will be Paolo, OLB, Sally, and we have them in a contact. So again, it depends on the icon. Depends how, because sometimes they use image, like they just shrink the image and make it into an icon, but it's an image. So it depends on the actual file, like the type of HTML it's being used. Yeah.
So if you see the HTML that it is
An image,
as an image, it should
99.9% yes.
it should have the empty quotes then.
If it's decorative, yes. It should have, if it's an image, you see that in the code, 99.9% of the situation, it does need some sort of alt text, yes. Excellent. All right, so now we come to the fun part. So we have a little exercise, and not to put people on the spot, but if you don't mind just getting into a group of 3 or 4 people, and I will maybe kind of like split you halfway across this room, so maybe folks on this side, or if you feel like you need to be groups on one side, that's fine. So just take a minute, get into groups, 3 and 4, just have a little exercise.
On the left of the screen, a slider for a flight booking website displaying a flight from Frankfurt for $1,138 and a flight time of 7 hours. On the right, a multicolored and complicated pie chart entitled Evolution of Reading. The bottom of the slide asks what are some accessibility issues that you notice in the following, and what are some possible solutions to improve them.
We have 2 different things. So we have, basically on one side we have a slider, and on the other side we have what looks like a big pie chart. So on the slider, it's basically, it looks like it's a slider for booking some sort of flight or vacation. It has 2 input fields. One says home airport, dates, has 2 checkboxes, nearby airports, exact dates, as well as 2 sliders. One has a dollar value, $1138, and one that has hours, which is 7 hours, and a nonstop checkbox. So I want the folks on this side of the room to look at the sliders. Don't worry about the input fields or the checkboxes, just worry about the sliders. And I want you to think of what are some accessibility issues that you notice, as well as what are some possible solutions to improve them. Even from your point of view, it doesn't have to be like expert opinion, how to go in and fix it in the code, just general user experience or things that folks with disability might have problem using. Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about those designs a little bit. All right, so we'll take one at a time. So we'll start with the slider group. Just before we start looking at what are some accessibility issues and what are some potential solutions for them, does anyone know what the purpose of these sliders are? Yes?
It changes the real-time results based on where you're moving.
Okay, so the answer is it changes the real-time results based on where it's moving. Okay, I'm just trying to get people's impressions on what they think this is. So it could be so basically the dollar value slider could be a price range. All right. Okay, so the groups who worked on some of the accessibility issues and solutions, what are some issues that you might
No headings.
So there are no headings on the slider. All right. Currency. All right, so that's a good point. So basically we see $1138, but we don't know what currency this is. Could be Canadian.
There's a color contrast concern because the gray thing, the round circle and the gray right in the middle, it could be difficult for people who are visually impaired to begin.
Oh, okay. So basically the idea is could be a potential problem with the color contrast because we have a slider with like a round control, and there's some gray and some maybe lighter gray or blue, and we're not sure if it meets color contrast, so that could be an issue. And yes, as mentioned earlier, currency could be an issue. Headings, I don't know where this, or more labels, like a form label. I don't know what the slider is really for. Any other potential issues? Overlapping. Oh, sorry.
We're just looking at the slide.
Okay, yeah. So you're talking about the input fields on the side. They're overlapping. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, but just for the purposes of this exercise, let's just focus on the slider because we'll be here all day if we talk about everything. Anything else?
Starting and ending,
Starting and ending. So
like you don't know where the dollar starts or where.
Yes. Okay, so that's a good point. So we have an issue with minimum and maximum values. We don't know where this starts, where it ends for both sliders. Yeah.
Is it even tabular?
Is it?
Can you tab through that sliders?
Okay, so basically, is the keyboard accessible? Can you use tab to kind of control it and the arrow keys? So that's always.
These two, I feel that these two slides should have a different color so that each is very distinct. This information
Okay.
to the side is in one color.
Okay.
To another slide and another information is to another distinct color.
Cool. So that's a good segue. So the answer is you think that both sliders should have different colors to kind of classify they're doing two different things. It's not bad. So what are there? Like we've mentioned a bunch of problems. What are there some solutions? Will a screen reader read the slider? That question?
The person cannot, yeah.
So the quick answer, it depends on how it's coded, because there's a specific way to code sliders where screen readers can detect them. So it all depends on that. We can't tell by looking at the design, so it could be a potential problem, but just by looking at the design, it's hard to tell. Okay, what other solutions? So we heard maybe have 2 different colors for the sliders. What are other?
The slider itself is tiny.
The slider itself is tiny.
Like the button.
Yes, so that's a good point. So for example, we have in the dollar value, it says 1,138. So it looks like it moves by $1 increments. So if it does, that could be a problem, especially if you're using a mouse. Like if you're using a keyboard, the other problem might be take you forever to get to the other end, right? Yes?
It might be better to just replace the sliders with an input field.
Okay, that's great. It's a great solution. So either add or replace the slider with an input field. Why not, right? Let's people have control over what they want to write in there. Any other potential solutions? Slider groups?
Immediately identifiable intervals for each.
Immediately identifiable, you mean visually identifiable? Yes, so that's a good suggestion. It all depends on what are the increments. So that's usually good for sliders that have definite values, right? So if you only have like 4 options or 5 options and you want to introduce a slider, definitely a visual cue where they are. It could be too much if you're moving on a $1 basis, because that means the whole slider will be tagged. But that's a good solution if there are defined increments and they're big. Awesome. So these are all good flaws, all good suggestions regarding the slider. The other thing, just in terms of visually, just because it's some sort of form, I guess, that we're looking at, just having things on the side to side, could also be challenging for someone who's using a magnifier because they kind of have to scroll sideways. Ultimately, when designing forms, the preference is to think mobile. So if you ever open the mobile application, it's usually stacked, it's usually vertical. Again, there's nothing wrong with it this way. It just might be a bit better to kind of like have it stacked or under each other. But definitely the minimum value, I don't know where the minimum maximum is. The labels, like I don't know if this is changing dollars that I'm going to be paying for the trip. The 7 hours, is that total flight time? Is that flight time and transit time? Like what is in that 7 hours? There's no indication, right? And this is a real slider. This is from kayak.com. At one point, they had this. And I think their website currently looks something still similar to that. So there are all sorts of problems that we've identified, that things that could be potentially made better. Let's move on to this fun one, the evolution of reading pie chart. So for the folks that worked on the evolution of reading pie chart, first of all, do you understand the purpose of this chart? No. Why not?
Because it's confusing. It's very colorful,
It's very colorful and?
but it's not informative as to what relates to what.
It's not informative to what relates to what. It's just a bunch of numbers and years together.
Yeah.
And someone said something from? It's complicated. So it's complicated. It's very hard to understand.
Even alt text probably won't describe what is there.
So yeah, good point. Alt text might not explain.
It doesn't really give you an idea of what exactly you're looking at. The fraction of words from
Okay. So no idea what you're really looking at here in this pie chart. Yeah.
Fonts are small, and also there are sections that you have percentages that you put up as the source, but you don't have it in other.
Okay, so fonts are small, and there are sections that, basically speaking of the source, I think you mean saying something like the 27% computer on the last year, but it doesn't say it anywhere else. Okay, what other problems are there? We heard font small, alt text could be an issue. It's confusing, you can't really understand it. Could be a big color contrast issue, yes, because we have what looks to me like light blue, yellow, maybe orange, maybe green or brown. It's even hard for me to tell. What else?
the information or whatever that is on the side. I can't really read it.
Okay, so the legend on the side that has the information regarding the pie chart, you can't read it.
Probably would be better to turn it into informative, like a table.
Okay, excellent. So you're already thinking of solutions. So, hey, we have a complex pie chart. Why not turn it into some sort of table, like understandable data that you can, even someone who is using a screen reader might be able to navigate much easier, because we're not sure if this is an image or if this is some sort of other complex graph where it's detected by a screen reader.
These are 3 pie charts, I guess.
Okay.
And they've just superimposed one pie chart on
Okay.
top with different size of circles.
Okay, that's a good point.
The circles have to be the same size.
Okay.
And there has to be 3 pie charts.
Okay.
And then it makes sense.
So your comment was there are 3 pie charts all combined into one for 1960, one for 1980, one for 2008. They should all be separated, given equal size, and this way it'd be easier to understand. Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else regarding this pie chart?
There's no alt text, so it doesn't say like what is talking about.
Okay, so there might not be alt text, so someone who's using a screen reader might not know what this is talking about.
For accessibility user to slide so that they have to come back and forth to read what the percentage is or what is talking about.
Yes, so that's a very good point. So you're saying even if there's some sort of information superimposed on this slide, on this pie chart, just if you're using, I'm guessing you mean like a mobile screen reader. If you're using a mobile screen reader, you're sliding to one piece of information to the other. You kind of have to slide back to kind of like make reference of it. Because, you know, even if you have a legend that's visually available, it tells you, you know, all this information. Someone who's visually disabled might not be able to get that information so easily, might not be even able to get it at all, right? What about the wording? Like it says evolution of reading, but we have radio and recorded music, as well as like phone. So I mean, to me that, unless there's something that they're not saying, to me that doesn't seem like great sources for reading, unless they mean it in like the ancient kind of like biblical sense of like you're just reading of, you know, whether it's voice or whether it's print, you're reading anyways, right? It's not very clear.
It's not accurate,
Yeah.
the content.
Yeah.
And also, I don't trust the chart. It said we listened to recorded music in 2008, but apparently not in 1960 or 80. The whole thing.
Yeah, so the comment was, you're not sure of its accuracy. There's some information on there that might not be very accurate regarding recorded music. Yeah, it's very true. As well as I would just add one last thing. There are portions of that pie chart, even let's say that there's an accessible alternative where there's a table or somehow figure captions, just like a little caption, or a nice paragraph under it explaining it. In the visual design itself, like we have some of the pie chart sections have percentages displayed, and some don't. So we're left guessing what's the percentage there. So
If you did alt text, you wouldn't put in information there that someone who doesn't look at the alt text would have access to.
yes, so that's a good point. So basically, you don't want to put extra information on the alt text that is not visually there too.
Yeah.
It's true, yeah. So you don't want to give dual experience, and that's a great example of where accessibility kind of works in reverse. Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, we'll just leave this visually this way, but we'll add that much more in the hidden or the alt text. And that's not really the point of hidden or alt text. The point is to give it an equal experience.
This pie chart is wrong because each pie chart would be 100%. So
Okay.
the outermost pie chart is even though it will have the same percentage, but it will show the greater area.
Okay.
That way a person cannot compare them.
Okay, so you're saying that there's a problem with the math.
It's wrong.
The addition is wrong. Yeah, that could be it.
Just maybe a side note.
Yeah.
The styling of the word at the top, the header.
The styling of the header?
Yeah, I think it could be a problem. It may not be that big of a problem, but I think it could be.
Oh, because it's like not sans serif? Sorry.
Yeah, it's not as clear.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Could be. I mean, I won't say it. It's like maybe it's not a huge problem, but it could be. These are great ideas, everyone. Thank you very much. So as you can see, like the whole point of this exercise was just to get you thinking regarding what can make things more accessible, what are potential problems. In summary, just to quickly rehash. So we need to be familiar with people with disabilities, obviously, and the assistive technology they use, so we can understand how to address their challenges. I would also add that, you know, everyone, as we've seen, everyone is disabled at some time or another and can benefit from accessible web pages as well as apps. And lastly, so our digital accessibility team, you know, we have initiatives that have potential to result in amazing innovations that make our site and apps better for everyone. What we're trying to say is that, you know, everyone has the potential of making things better, whether it's by testing it, whether it's by developing it, designing it, and we should just really bank on this type of energy and that type of information and knowledge that we have, just to make it not only good for accessibility but good for everyone. I would like to give a big thank you for everyone. Thank you very much for coming today, and we will be sharing with you a survey afterwards. So if you have a minute, you can definitely grab the QR code. If not, we'll be mailing it to everyone that came to the session today. If you haven't signed in the sign-in sheet, this is one last call, please do. But thank you again. And you've already received the invitations for the next topic, which is Intro to WCAG, so we'll look forward to seeing you then.